you will never have what you want. There is a recurring experience in modern life that feels both personal and universal. A person works towards something they believe will bring them fulfillment, a job, a relationship, or some sort of personal achievement. They will spend years in pursuit of this and shape their identity around the goal and endure the hardship and the loss that comes with the chase. Then if they reach it, the outcome feels less complete than expected. The satisfaction that they get is brief, and that's if it arrives at all. What once seemed essential to them now feels routine, or worse, hollow. This pattern is not incidental. It's a structure embedded in how humans relate to desire. We are not simply beings who want things. We are beings who want through absence. And much of what drives our actions, our stories, and our suffering is not the object itself, but the space we imagine it will fill. In psychoanalytic theory, this space has a name. It is the objet petit, the object cause of desire. Introduced by Jacques Lacan, it is not the thing that we want, but the placeholder of a loss that defines our sense of self. What we call desire is not directed at a real, tangible, attainable object. It is structured around a void, a sense of something missing that was never actually there, or never actually present to begin with. This becomes clearer when we examine how the self is formed. According to Lacan, the human subject begins in a state of disarray. Before you or we learn a language, before we have a coherent image of ourselves, we live in fragments, sensations without a shape, needs without names. This state is called the real, and while we often imagine it as a kind of original wholeness, it is in fact overwhelming and formless. The first relief comes when the infant sees itself in a mirror. In that moment, the child identifies with the external image of themselves, whole, composed and unified. This is what Lacan would call the mirror stage, and it marks the beginning of the imaginary order. But that mirror image is deceptive. Internally, the infant does not feel unified. Their body still stumbles, the feelings still overflow, yet the child identifies with this external image and begins to form an ego, a self-image, based on something it is not. That self-image becomes a permanent structure, something to live up to defend, to chase after. The ego then is not the truth of the self, but a mask formed through misrecognition. It gives coherence, but at the cost of alienation. The next transformation happens through language. When the child begins to speak, when it enters the symbolic order, it gains access to meaning, recognition, and society, but this too involves a loss. To speak is to simply represent, and representation always involves absence. For example, when you say, "I am here," what you're offering is not your presence itself, but a signifier of that presence. The phrase points to your existence in a physical state, but it can't deliver the fullness of what it is to be you in that moment. Your bodily sensations, your emotions, your history, your immediate experience of consciousness. Others hear the words, but they don't actually know what it is to be you. They do not receive you. And even you, in speaking, are already split. There is the self who experiences, and the self who speaks about that experience. This gap between word and meaning, between self and expression, is structural. It does not rise from error or trauma. It's the inevitable outcome of becoming a subject in language. And it produces what Lacan calls lack. Not the lack of a specific object, but a fundamental absence at the heart of subjectivity. We are shaped by what we are missing. It is out of this lack that desire emerges. Lacan distinguishes between need, which is biological, and demand, which is need expressed through language. Desire is what remains when need is subtracted from demand. It is the part of our longing that can never be satisfied. Because it's not really about the object. It's about recognition, being seen, being held in the other's gaze. But like language, the other can never respond exactly as we wish, and so the gap remains. This is where objet petit enters again. It is the cause of desire, the thing that makes us want, but which is never itself attained. It is not a specific person or object or a goal. It's the trace of a lost wholeness that never really existed, and yet we spend our lives circling it, chasing things we think will fill the space it marks. The objet petit can take many forms: a lover, an achievement, a fantasy, but it's always a placeholder. We don't want the object, we want the feeling it promises to restore. You don't need to study Lacan or read his long pieces of poetic rambles to know how this works. You only need to look around. For example, a new video game is announced, GTA 6 for instance. We both watch the trailer, we analyze every frame, imagine how it will feel. You've played the last game, GTA 5, down to its death, and the new one feels like the thing that will make gaming feel alive again. The desire builds for years, then the game is released, you're going to play it, enjoy it, love it, but soon enough that excitement will fade. The void will return, and it's not because the game failed, but it's because what you were chasing was never the game itself. It was the idea of fullness, projected into the future. The object changed, but the structure itself remained. This pattern repeats everywhere. In wealth, people who attain financial success often do not stop. The accumulation of wealth becomes compulsive. Why? Because money is not just money, it's a symbol of control or freedom or self-worth. And symbols are never enough. No amount of accumulation can secure what is structurally absent. Or, for example, take bodybuilding. Someone reshapes their body, gains strength, and perfects their form, but their gaze always finds the next imperfection. From the outside, an observer will not notice their flaw, but from within, to them, it matters, because they are measuring themselves against an internal standard shaped by lack. They feel a flaw that no one else sees, and cannot truly communicate it, because language, again, cannot transmit the full weight of subjective experience. It cannot express the entire history that makes that flaw matter. In these examples, the common thread is not addiction or excess or greed, it is the repetition of desire, the tendency to move from one object to the next, never quite reaching the end. This is what Lacan meant when he said that desire is not for the object, but for something lost, or more accurately, something structurally missing. This is why desire is not resolved when we get what we want. The object, once possessed, collapses. Its power was in its distance, its status as a potential, not a possession. Once obtained, it becomes ordinary. Another object arises to take its place, and the circuit resumes. This isn't a personal flaw. It's a structural loop sustained by a void that cannot be filled. And modern systems exploit this. Advertising, for example, doesn't sell you products. It sells the idea of completion. Media offers fantasies of perfect love, absolute success, spiritual peace. These all form a wholeness that bypass the lack, but nothing can bypass it. Every desire, no matter how vivid, returns to the same circle, the pursuit of something that would end the pursuit. And to maintain this pursuit, the mind constructs fantasies. These are not idle daydreams, but psychic mechanisms that help us bear the truth of lack. Fantasy gives a coherent narrative to a desire. It patches the gap with stories that we tell ourselves, that this person will complete us, this job will fulfill us, or this one act will make us real. The fantasy is not a distortion of desire. It is its necessary framework. Without it, the subject would collapse. The fantasy is not a lie we tell ourselves out of weakness. It is a structure we construct to stay alive. And at the far edge of this system lies jouissance, a form of enjoyment that exceeds pleasure. It is not the satisfaction of desire, but its overload, a kind of painful intensity, often bordering on destruction. If desire is sustained by absence, jouissance is what happens when we come too close to the real. It is a kind of ecstatic suffering, and because the symbolic order, or language, society cannot fully contain this experience, it becomes threatening. Jouissance is chaste, but also feared. It is the point where the structure starts to break. So what then can be done? If desire is endless, every object fails. If language divides us from ourselves, are we condemned to chase illusions forever? I'd argue not necessarily. The aim is not to abolish desire, nor to pretend that lack can be overcome. The aim is to recognize the structure, to see that longing is not a flaw, but a feature, that desire will never be satisfied. But this doesn't mean we are broken. Desire animates life. It fuels art, love, political vision, transformation. But when we confuse the object with the cause, when we believe we're getting the thing that will heal the lack, we set ourselves up for disappointment. So to understand objet petit is to understand that what you want is not the thing itself, but the space it promises to fill. And that space is not an error, it's where meaning lives. So the question is not, how do I finally get what I want? It's, what kind of life can I build around the knowledge that I never will and never need to?